Why does the block never get ahead? In the late 1990s, a team of sociologists gained access to the handwritten ledgers of a high-level street organization in Chicago. The data revealed a staggering economic contradiction that remains the bedrock of urban poverty today. While the cultural imagery of the street focuses on the flash of jewelry and the roar of high-end engines, the financial reality is a mathematical nightmare. The average foot soldier, the young man standing on the corner for 12 hours a day, was earning roughly $3.30 an hour. Even adjusted for the modern era, the ground floor wage of the narcotics trade consistently falls below the federal minimum wage. When this income is further adjusted for the risk tax, the statistically inevitable cost of legal fees, medical bills, and the high probability of a shortened life expectancy, the hourly rate effectively drops into the negatives. The street is not an avenue for wealth. It is an extractive, high-risk economy that survives on a constant influx of cheap, disposable labor. The trap is marketed as a shortcut to the American dream, but in reality, it functions as a sophisticated franchise model designed to strip mine the energy of the youth and return that capital into a closed loop of systemic failure. To understand the anatomy of the block, one must view the territory not as a neighborhood, but as a physical asset with high maintenance costs. In areas controlled by sets like the Grape Street What's Crips or the Bounty Hunter Bloods, the geography is a grid of liability. A single corner is a retail outlet. However, unlike a legitimate franchise, this outlet has no legal protection, no insurance, and a customer base that is inherently unstable. The social stakes of the territory are dictated by the set. The set provides the branding and the perceived security, but it demands a steep price for entry. The architecture of the neighborhood, the housing projects, the narrow alleys, the strategically placed lookouts, is repurposed into a fortress that paradoxically traps its defenders inside. The shot caller at the top of the local hierarchy operates like a regional manager, but one whose corporate headquarters is often a prison cell. This creates a leadership vacuum where the pursuit of power is constant, yet the rewards of that power are increasingly diluted by the sheer cost of maintaining control over a few city blocks. The first mechanical failure of the street economy lies in the re-up and the cold math of the product. In the illicit economy, there is no wholesale credit. Every transaction is cash on delivery, which places the entirety of the financial risk on the lowest level of the chain. When a mid-level distributor moves product to a local set, the soldier is responsible for the inventory. If the inventory is seized by law enforcement or lost to a rival set, the debt does not vanish. It becomes a permanent liability that the soldier must work off, often for zero pay, for months or even years. This is the paradox of power. The more product a set moves, the more attention it draws from the state, which in turn increases the street overhead. The cost of doing business rises in direct proportion to success. The harsh reality is that most entry-level participants are not working for profit. They are working to pay off a revolving door of debt to the tier above them. The consequence is a form of indentured servitude where the individual is tethered to the block not by loyalty, but by a balance sheet they can never balance. Beyond the cost of the product, the internal taxing system ensures that capital never settles at the bottom. In the hierarchy of organizations like the Black Disciples or the Vice Lords, dues are a mandatory reality. These are not merely symbolic payments. They are a systemic drain on the individual's daily earnings. A runner may earn $500 in a night of high-volume sales, but after the set tax, the protection fee for the corner, and the kickback to the incarcerated leadership, that runner is left with barely enough to cover basic living expenses. The street mimics the most predatory aspects of the gig economy. The soldier provides the labor, the vehicle, and the risk, while the upper management, often insulated from the day-to-day danger, takes the lion's share of the revenue. This internal taxation is the mechanism that prevents the accumulation of personal wealth. It ensures that the soldier remains hungry enough to keep working the corner, but never stable enough to leave it. The result is a workforce that is perpetually desperate, making them easy to manipulate and even easier to replace. The most complex layer of this economic trap is the street overhead associated with money laundering. For the few who manage to accumulate a significant surplus of cash, the problem of cleaning the money becomes a secondary tax that often bleeds the operation dry. The traditional model involves funneling illicit gains through cash-heavy businesses like car washes, laundromats, or small soul food restaurants. However, these businesses are rarely profitable in their own right. They are often ghost operations that lose money every month due to poor management, lack of genuine foot traffic, and the high cost of maintaining a front. The entrepreneur of the street finds themselves in a second paradox. They are losing legitimate money to hide illegitimate money. The cleaning fee can be as high as 30 to 40%. By the time the money is laundered and available for clean use, the actual purchasing power has been decimated. This is why many high-level players remain in the same neighborhoods they grew up in. They have the appearance of wealth, but they lack the liquid, legitimate capital required to exit the system and enter the traditional economy. The final stage of the closed loop is the survival tax. In the street economy, money rarely leaves a 3-block radius in a way that benefits the community or the individual. Instead, the capital is recycled back into the system to manage the fallout of the lifestyle. A significant portion of any set's revenue is diverted into the pot, a communal fund used to pay for legal retainers, bail bonds, and commissary for members who have been removed from the street by the state. When a member is killed, the set often covers the funeral costs, a grim but necessary employee benefit that maintains morale. This creates a parasitic relationship between the street and the legal system. The money generated on the corner flows directly into the pockets of defense attorneys, bail bondsmen, and the private companies that service the prison system. The trap is not just the neighborhood. It is an entire economic ecosystem that thrives on the incarceration and death of its participants. The individual is not building a legacy. They are funding their own eventual disappearance. This cycle is nearly impossible to break because it is built on a foundation of false liquidity. To a young man with no access to traditional credit or employment, a $100 bill in the hand today is worth more than the promise of a stable career 10 years in the future. The street exploits this temporal discounting. It offers immediate, albeit small, rewards that mask the long-term systemic destruction. The unifying theory of the block is that it functions as a black hole for human and financial capital. The energy, intelligence, and ambition of the neighborhood are sucked into a vacuum where they are converted into street credit, a currency that has zero value outside of the immediate 3-block radius. The shot caller who is feared in his neighborhood is a nobody in the boardroom, and his wealth is a house of cards built on debt and high-interest risk. The block remains the same because the money it generates is never allowed to grow. It is only allowed to circulate until it is eventually seized by the state or buried in the ground. The tragedy of the American street is not a lack of industry, but the presence of a broken one. The men and women who navigate the complex politics of the Bloods and Crips possess a level of grit and strategic thinking that would be lauded in any other sector. Yet, they are trapped in a franchise model that is designed to fail them. The streets do not provide a path to the top. They provide a treadmill that runs faster and faster until the person on it collapses. True power is not the ability to control a corner. It is the ability to walk away from it with your life and your labor intact. Until the math of the street is recognized for the losing proposition it is, the cycle will continue to claim the next generation of soldiers who believe they can beat the house. To understand why the capital generated on the street never translates into community wealth, one must examine the history of the franchise expansion that occurred during the 1980s. When the Crips and Bloods began to migrate from south-central Los Angeles to the Pacific Northwest, the Midwest, and the Deep South, it was often framed as an aggressive territorial conquest. In reality, it was a desperate search for new markets driven by the same saturation issues that plague any retail sector. In Los Angeles, the density of sets had reached a breaking point. The market share for a single block was too small to support the growing number of participants. By exporting the brand, the blue and red rags, the specific knowledge of the cook, and the organizational structure, high-level distributors were attempting to find virgin territory where the profit margins were higher and the law enforcement pressure was lower. However, this expansion carried a hidden logistical tax. Maintaining a supply line over thousands of miles required a sophisticated infrastructure that the street was never built to manage. The cost of transportation, the loss of product through shrinkage or theft by disgruntled couriers, and the necessity of paying off local enforcers in new cities meant that the out-of-state premium was often swallowed by the cost of the move. The 1992 What's Truce provides a stark sociological case study in the failed economic pivot of the street. Following the civil unrest in Los Angeles, leadership from the Grape Street Watts Crips, the PJ Watts Crips, and the Bounty Hunter Bloods attempted to transition from a wartime economy to a developmental one. The goal was to leverage their collective influence to secure legitimate contracts and investments for the neighborhood. However, they were met with a systemic wall. The street brand that allowed them to control the block was the very thing that made them toxic to the legitimate financial world. Banks would not lend to individuals with criminal records, and insurance companies flagged the zip codes as high risk. This forced the set back into the illicit market, proving that once an organization is branded by the street, its pivot cost is effectively infinite. The system is designed to allow for the entry of labor but provides no exit ramp for capital. The most silent but devastating partner in the street economy is the legal industry tax. In a standard corporation, legal fees are a fraction of the operating budget. In the street, the lawyer is a primary stakeholder. For a mid-level distributor in an organization like the Black Disciples, a significant portion of every brick sold is already earmarked for the retainer fund. This is not just for the individual. It is a systemic requirement to keep the hierarchy intact. If a lower-level soldier is arrested, the organization must provide a lawyer to ensure that the soldier does not cooperate with the state. This creates a massive wealth transfer from the poorest neighborhoods to the most affluent legal districts. The money made on the corner of 63rd and Halsted doesn't stay in the community to build grocery stores or schools. It flows into the bank accounts of high-priced defense attorneys in the downtown loop. The street is essentially a collection agency for the legal profession, generating billable hours through high-risk activity that inevitably leads to the courtroom. The physical geography of the company town model further cements the poverty trap. In the high-rise era of public housing, such as the now-demolished Cabrini Green or Robert Taylor homes, the architecture functioned as a closed-loop economy. Because residents were often isolated from the surrounding city, the gang controlled not just the illegal trade, but the informal trade as well. They taxed the jitneys or unlicensed taxis, the candy houses selling groceries out of apartments, and even the mechanics working in the parking lots. While this gave the appearance of a mini-state, it was a predatory one. The wealth was not being created. It was being redistributed among people who were already impoverished. Every dollar taxed from a neighbor was a dollar removed from the local economy's ability to sustain itself. When the buildings were eventually torn down, the wealth vanished because it was never invested in portable assets or education. It was spent on the immediate, visible symbols of status that have zero resale value in the real world. The middle manager trap is perhaps the most dangerous position in the entire hierarchy. In the corporate world, the middle manager is the bridge to the executive suite. In the street, the middle manager, the lieutenant or enforcer, is the primary target of both the state and rival sets. This tier of the organization has enough visibility to be indicted under conspiracy laws, but not enough liquid wealth to fully insulate themselves from the street. They are responsible for the soldier's mistakes and the shot caller's demands. When a re-up goes missing, the middle manager is the one who must enforce the debt, placing them in the direct line of fire for retaliatory violence. The life expectancy and freedom expectancy for this tier is the lowest in the entire system. Mathematically, the middle manager is taking the highest risk for a diminishing return. They are often house-rich and cash-poor, owning high-end vehicles or jewelry that they cannot easily liquidate when they need to go on the run or pay for a sudden legal emergency. The war tax is the final, most destructive element of the street's economic failure. When a conflict breaks out between sets, such as the long-standing rivalry between the Rollin 60s neighborhood Crips and the 8-Tray gangster Crips, the cost of war overrides all other financial considerations. Business cannot be conducted on a contested corner. Customers are driven away by the presence of violence and increased police patrols. Resources that should be spent on product or expansion are instead diverted into hardware, illegal firearms that are purchased at a massive markup on the black market. A firearm that costs $500 legally can cost $2,000 on the street due to its clean status or its history. This is dead capital. A gun does not produce a return on investment. it only protects a diminishing asset. During periods of high conflict, the net profit of a set often drops to zero, even as the risk to life and limb reaches its peak. The war tax ensures that no set can ever truly win, because the cost of the victory is the destruction of the market they were fighting over. This leads to the intergenerational debt that haunts the families of those involved in the street. When a participant is incarcerated for a lengthy term, the financial burden shifts to the family. The cost of collect calls, commissary, and travel for prison visits can exceed hundreds of dollars a month. For a family living on the edge of poverty, this is a catastrophic drain. The lifestyle of the individual is subsidized by the labor of their mothers, sisters, and partners who work legitimate, low-wage jobs to keep the incarcerated member comfortable. The street markets itself as a way to provide for the family, but the cold data shows the opposite. The family provides for the street. The money flows out of the household and into the state-contracted phone and vending companies that service the prisons. The individual is not a provider. They are a long-term liability that prevents the next generation from accumulating the savings necessary to move out of the block. The shadow economy of the street also suffers from a total lack of intellectual property protection. In the legitimate business world, a new marketing strategy or a more efficient distribution model can be patented or branded to create long-term value. On the block, any innovation is immediately stolen by rivals. If one set develops a more efficient way to move weight or clean funds, that knowledge is extracted through violence or simple imitation. There is no competitive advantage that lasts longer than a few months. This prevents the development of sophisticated capital. The street remains stuck in a primitive, high-violence state because it cannot evolve past the basic muscle and product model. It is an economy of the immediate, where the inability to plan for the future is not a personal flaw, but a structural requirement. You cannot plan for a 5-year fiscal cycle when your quarterly report is a police raid or a drive-by shooting. When we look at the exit cost of the street, we see the ultimate failure of the system. In any other career, 30 years of high-level management and risk-taking would result in a pension, stock options, and a respected place in the community. In the street, 30 years of service usually results in a life tale, a series of parole requirements, a permanent felon status that bars employment and housing, and a physical body broken by the stress of the lifestyle. The OG status, so often romanticized, is frequently a position of extreme vulnerability. These individuals are often the poorest rich men in the neighborhood. They may have the respect of the youth, but they lack the basic security of a health insurance policy or a retirement account. They are forced to stay active long past their prime because they have no other way to survive. The street is a Hotel California economy. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never truly leave with your earnings. The evolution of the street economy has reached a new, more volatile stage with the mass adoption of synthetic substances. In the era of plant-based narcotics, the supply chain was subject to the vulnerabilities of geography, weather, and international borders. The transition to synthetics, primarily fentanyl and its analogs, has fundamentally altered the cost of goods sold for organizations like the Crips and the Latin Kings. From a purely mathematical perspective, the profit margins are staggering. A small amount of precursor chemicals can be converted into millions of dollars of street-level retail product with minimal space and labor. This is the paradox of power. As the product becomes cheaper and easier to produce, the barrier to entry for rival sets vanishes. The synthetic shift has democratized the narcotics trade, leading to a hyper-competitive market where brand loyalty is non-existent. The harsh reality is that this efficiency has created a death subsidy. The potency of the product is so high that it is effectively killing the customer base at a rate that exceeds the street's ability to recruit new users. The consequence is a total destabilization of the block's hierarchy. The old guard, who relied on stable, long-term distribution networks, are being displaced by renegade sets who prioritize high-volume, short-term gain, leading to a surge in internal friction that bleeds the organization of its most experienced members. This destabilization is further accelerated by the digital infrastructure tax. In the modern era, the physical corner has been supplemented, and in some cases replaced, by digital marketplaces and social media platforms. For sets in cities like Chicago or St. Louis, the digital footprint is a mandatory marketing tool. Drill music and social media posturing are used to project power and claim territory. However, this creates a massive visibility liability. In the corporate world, marketing is a legitimate expense. On the block, marketing is a confession. The paradox of power here is that the very tools used to build clout and attract customers are the same tools used by federal agencies to build conspiracy cases. The harsh reality is that the soldier is now required to be a content creator, an enforcer, and a salesman simultaneously, all while operating under constant surveillance. The security overhead has shifted from physical lookouts to complex encryption and operational security protocols that most participants are not equipped to handle. The consequence is a mass indictment cycle where entire sets are removed from the street simultaneously, creating power vacuums that are filled by even younger, more impulsive actors who lack any understanding of the systemic costs of their actions. The informal banking system of the block provides another layer of economic extraction. Because participants are excluded from the traditional banking sector, they rely on a shadow financial network that is inherently predatory. This includes check cashing outlets, high-interest street loans, and the use of retail products like high-end sneakers or designer clothing as a form of currency. When a member of a set like the Bloods needs to move dirty capital into a clean state, they often pay a liquidity premium that can reach 50%. This is the paradox of power. The individual may hold a large amount of currency, but their purchasing power is restricted to a very small, high-cost ecosystem. The harsh reality is that the street economy has no store of value. Cash is a liability that attracts both the state and thieves, and because it cannot be invested in stocks, bonds, or real estate without triggering an investigation, it is often spent on depreciating assets like luxury vehicles or jewelry. The consequence is that wealth on the block is transient. It exists only in the moment of consumption and leaves no trail of equity for the individual's children, ensuring that the next generation starts at a net zero balance. The healthcare crisis of the street represents the most overlooked risk tax. In the legitimate workforce, an injury is managed through insurance and workers' compensation. On the block, a work-related injury, typically a gunshot wound or physical assault, is a catastrophic financial event. Because of the risk of arrest, many participants avoid public hospitals, relying instead on underground medics who charge exorbitant fees for substandard care. Even when public facilities are used, the post-care liability is immense. A permanent disability means the individual can no longer work the line, turning a former asset into a long-term financial drain on the set or the family. This is the paradox of power. The violence used to protect the market eventually destroys the labor force required to run it. The harsh reality is that the street has a one-way retirement policy. There is no disability insurance for the enforcer who can no longer walk. The consequence is a hidden population of street veterans who live in extreme poverty, their medical needs draining the last remnants of capital from their families, further tightening the loop of the poverty trap. The canteen and commissary siphon serves as a final, institutionalized extraction of street capital. When the state removes a high-level earner from the block, the financial relationship does not end. It merely changes form. The prison industrial loop ensures that the money generated from illicit activity continues to flow into the legitimate economy, but in a way that provides zero benefit to the sender. The cost of maintaining a social standing behind bars through phone calls, email services, and overpriced food items from the commissary is a mandatory tax on the set's remaining outside members. For an organization like the Hoover Crimps, the monthly prison support bill can reach into the tens of thousands of dollars. This is the paradox of power. The set believes it is taking care of its own, but it is actually subsidizing the very correctional system that is designed to dismantle it. The harsh reality is that the prison system is a capital sink. It takes the illicit profits of the street and converts them into legitimate revenue for state-contracted corporations. The consequence is that the block is perpetually undercapitalized, as its surplus is constantly diverted to maintain a lifestyle for people who are no longer productive members of the organization. The unifying theory of the block stagnation is rooted in the institutional memory loss caused by the high rate of turnover. In a functioning economy, knowledge is passed down from one generation to the next, creating a compound effect of expertise. On the block, the management tier is removed or killed so frequently that the operational manual is constantly being rewritten by novices. The young men standing on the corners of Crenshaw or Slauson today are making the same mathematical and strategic errors that their predecessors made in the 1980s because the OGS who could have taught them are either dead or serving life sentences. The street is a machine that consumes its own history. This generational erasure ensures that the set remains in a perpetual state of startup chaos. It never matures into a stable entity because it is always in survival mode. The cycle is impossible to break because the price of knowledge is too high. By the time a participant understands the math of the trap, they are usually in a position where they can no longer act on that knowledge. The system is further reinforced by the social capital trap. In the neighborhood, respect and loyalty are the only currencies that matter, but they are non-transferable. A man who has spent 20 years building a reputation as a shot caller in a specific set has a high social net worth within a 3-block radius. However, the moment he steps outside that radius or attempts to enter the legitimate workforce, that social capital becomes a liability. His resume is a record of violence and trauma that the outside world fears or reviles. He is forced to remain on the block to maintain his status, even if that status no longer provides a financial return. This is the ultimate closed loop. The individual is incentivized to stay in a failing system because the alternative cost, starting at the bottom of the legitimate world as an aging, unskilled laborer, is too bruising to the ego and the wallet. The block does not just take a man's freedom. It takes his ability to imagine himself as anything else. The system paradox is not a glitch in the urban landscape. It is a feature of a highly extractive economic model that mirrors the most predatory aspects of global capitalism. The street offers the illusion of agency to those who have been denied it by every other institution. It tells the young man that he is an entrepreneur, a soldier, or a boss, while the cold math proves he is a disposable unit of labor in a franchise that he will never own. The trap is the belief that one can beat a system that is designed to profit from your failure. The money flows up, the risk flows down, and the community is left with the bill. The cycle of the streets remains unbroken because we continue to view it as a moral failing rather than a mechanical one. Until the economic engine of the block is understood as a series of high-interest taxes on the poor, the soldier will continue to stand on the corner, believing he is chasing a fortune, while he is actually funding his own disappearance. The block never gets ahead because it was never designed to. It was designed to stay exactly where it is, consuming the lives and the labor of those who call it home. If this analysis of the systemic mechanics behind the street economy provided you with a deeper understanding of the trap, consider supporting the channel to see more investigative content on the hidden structures of our world. Like and subscribe for more in-depth stories from the block. The logistics of the cut represents a secondary, often invisible layer of the street's economic overhead. In a legitimate retail environment, shrinkage, loss due to theft, damage, or administrative error, is a manageable percentage, usually hovering between 1 and 2%. On the block, shrinkage is a constant and volatile variable. Because the product is unregulated and the workers are often operating under extreme psychological stress, the rate of loss is exponentially higher. A runner for a set of the Roland 30s Harlem Crips might lose product during a police foot pursuit, or a portion of the inventory might be skimmed by a mid-level enforcer as an unofficial service fee. These losses are never absorbed by the organization. They are always pushed down onto the individual at the bottom of the chain. This creates a debt spiral, where the soldier is constantly working to break even on previous losses rather than earning new capital. In many cases, the individual is effectively paying the organization for the privilege of risking their life, a reversal of the traditional employer-employee relationship that ensures the ground floor remains in a state of permanent insolvency. The physical real estate of the set also carries a maintenance cost that is rarely factored into the public perception of street wealth. To hold a corner, a set must maintain a constant 24-hour presence. This requires a shift rotation of lookouts, runners, and enforcers. Unlike a legitimate business, there is no automation. The labor is intensely manual and requires a high degree of redundancy. If a lookout is arrested, another must be immediately available to take his place, or the territory is open, inviting incursions from rival sets like the bounty hunter bloods. This human capital requirement means that the set is often overstaffed for the amount of revenue being generated. The net profit per worker is diluted to the point of absurdity. The organization is essentially a job program for the neighborhood, but one that pays less than the cost of living and offers no benefits other than temporary protection. The set is territory-rich but cash-poor, holding blocks that have high symbolic value but provide diminishing economic returns as law enforcement pressure increases. The branding debt is another sophisticated mechanism that keeps capital from leaving the block. In the hyper-competitive environment of the streets, visibility is a form of currency. To maintain authority and attract new recruits, high-level members must project an image of extreme prosperity. This is the marketing budget of the street. However, this marketing is entirely consumptive. Money is spent on high-end fashion, luxury rental vehicles, and nightlife, assets that lose value the moment they are purchased. This creates a status treadmill where the individual must earn more and more just to maintain the appearance of being successful. The paradox of power is that the more successful a member appears, the more they become a target for both the state and predatory peers within the neighborhood. The branding debt ensures that any surplus capital is immediately wasted on the symbols of power rather than being invested in the actual foundations of power, such as education, legal property, or legitimate business ventures. To analyze the block as a disposable distribution hub, one must look at its position in the global supply chain. The block is the last mile of a massive, multi-billion-dollar international industry. At the top of this chain are the cartels, who operate with the efficiency and scale of multinational corporations. They view the local sets, whether they are Bloods in Atlanta or Crips in Seattle, as independent contractors who are entirely replaceable. The cartel takes the wholesale profit, while the block takes the retail risk. The markup at the street level is high, but so is the operational cost. The block is effectively a burner phone for the global trade. When the state moves in to dismantle a distribution network, the cartel simply finds a new set to move the product. The institutional knowledge and the casualties are localized to the block, leaving the global structure untouched. This is the ultimate system paradox. The soldier believes he is part of a powerful, worldwide organization, but in reality, he is a single-use asset in a system that views his incarceration or death as a routine cost of doing business. The insurance gap on the street is filled by private justice, which is perhaps the most expensive form of conflict resolution ever devised. In the legitimate economy, a contract dispute is settled in court for a fraction of the contract's value. On the block, a contract dispute, such as a late payment for product or a perceived slight to the brand, is settled through violence. The cost of enforcement is staggering. It requires the mobilization of hardware, the use of soldiers, who must then be subsidized while they are on the run, and the inevitable retaliation tax from the opposing set. A dispute over $1,000 can easily lead to a conflict that costs the set $50,000 in lost revenue, legal fees, and funeral expenses. The street is an economy without arbitration. Because there is no rule of law, every transaction is backed by the threat of force, making the transactional friction so high that long-term growth is impossible. This brings us to the final exit math. When a participant reaches the end of their career on the street, whether through age, injury, or incarceration, the settlement they receive is almost always a negative number. There is no social security for the retired enforcer. Instead, there is a legacy of debt. If the individual has children, those children are born into the risk tax of the parent. The family name is flagged by law enforcement, and the intergenerational trauma functions as a pre-existing condition that limits the child's access to the traditional economy. The wealth that was supposed to lift the family out has instead buried the family in. The trap is not just a place. It is a chronological loop where the failures of the father are visited upon the son, ensuring that the labor pool for the corner is perpetually replenished. The system paradox of the block is a mirror of the broader economic disparities in the modern world, but amplified to a lethal degree. It is a system that rewards the aggressor in the short term while guaranteeing the elimination of the participant in the long term. The street does not create millionaires. It creates temporary custodians of cash who are eventually required to return that cash to the system through legal fees, commissary, and the costs of survival. The tales from the block are not stories of triumph. They are economic postmortems of a failed franchise model. The block remains in a state of permanent recession because it is built on the extraction of its most valuable resource, the potential of its people. When we ask, why does the block never change? The answer is found in the ledgers, not the legends. It doesn't change because the math of the trap is rigged. It is an economy designed to circulate poverty, not to generate wealth. It thrives on the illusion of opportunity, while maintaining a reality of extraction. To break the cycle, one must first recognize that the street is not an alternative to the system. It is the most brutal, unchecked version of the system itself. The only way to win the game of the streets is to refuse the contract entirely and recognize the trap for what it truly is: a machine that turns human life into dead capital. This investigative look into the systemic mechanics of the street reveals a landscape where the fast money is the slowest way to reach security. The soldier is not a rebel. He is an unpaid intern for a global industry that will never know his name. The shot caller is not a king. He is a middle manager in a company that has already written his termination papers. The block is the ultimate closed loop, a mathematical certainty of loss that continues to claim its tax every single day.